The endgame is the most difficult part of the game to play. Precision is required, and I think what we would most benefit from is method to help us here. That's what I'm going to try and teach you. Now, I'm going to show you some simple techniques which I hope will help you to play the endgame better. Now, the first thing to realise is that the master cannot keep all the important endgames in his mind. Instead, he uses guidelines to help him work his way through the various positions he'll encounter at the board. And here for you now are those important master tips which will undoubtedly help you to improve your game. In this little section, you're going to learn how important the king is in the endgame. The king is a strong piece. Use your king aggressively and actively. Now, this really is a fabulous example coming up, illustrating that the king is indeed a strong piece. And it's from a game between Mikhail Tal and Lisitsyn from the Leningrad tournament in 1956. Here, just assessing the position, we actually see that Tal is a pawn down. He sacrificed the pawn deliberately in order to lame black's pawn structure to create some nice dark squared holes on c5 and d4, and as you can see, the bishop on c8 is a bit of a mess. But I wonder if anybody would play Tal's next move without very, very careful reflection. Tal played an amazing move here. He played king d2. I think this is a remarkable move actually, and it's the introduction to an odyssey where the white king actually roams all over black's position, picking off material. The key to it all is a black pawn structure. It doesn't really work in very well with the bishop on c8. And whereas all of black's pieces are blocked in, unable to attack the white king, this gives the white pieces more of a free hand, especially the king. And let's see the next few moves to see how Tal takes advantage of this. King c3 was the next move. Black played f4, trying to get the bishop out, and then king d4. The key to all this remarkable play is the fact that there's little danger to the white king. For instance, looking at the position, which black piece can even put the king in a dangerous check here? Meanwhile, the king continues his journey. He may well threaten king c5 here, or if not, knight c5, and the black position is under tremendous pressure. Well, Lisitsyn played sensibly. He brought his bishop out to f5, trying to exchange off his bad bishop for white's good bishop. Not so bad, but it's what remains on the board that counts. Tal played rook d2, guarding the second rank, and black played rook e6, not so much to defend his pawn as to prepare rook h6. And this is another very important aspect of endgames really. If you're defending, you've got to go for counterplay. You can't just sit there and let the guy run all over you with active play. I mean, you've got to try and do something in endgames. So rook h6 is a correct move, it's a good move, and it hits the white h-pawn. Never mind, says Tal, I'm going to continue my journey up the board. And another wonderful king move, king e5. And now we see where the white king is headed. Well, of course, the king can't get there at the moment because the rook is actually preventing the king from getting into the position. But, well, black put his rook on h6 to take on h4. And when he does so, in comes the white king. So we've had 8 moves since the start of the position. And the king has moved actually 5 out of those 8 moves. It's moved all the way from c1 up to d6. And really the black position is under heavy pressure here. It's very difficult for black to actually neutralise the power of white's king. In the endgame, the king is a strong piece. You've got to use it. Compare the kings here and you will see why white has a winning position. Well, black checked to avoid white snapping off the pawn at c6 straight away, and in came the king. Black played knight f5, trying to get his knight back into the centre, and yet another king move, king b7. It all becomes much more easy to understand now. The king is threatening to take off the a-pawn, and then white's pawn on a3 will just march all the way up the board to a8. Knight d4 was played. And that actually creates a threat. Again, Lisitsyn is proceeding on the basis, well, he can't really neutralise the white king, the power of the king, so he might as well go for counterplay. And so black has the idea of going rook to h2 here, as indicated, followed by f3. And Tao takes due note of that fact. He plays rook f2. An excellent move. He's very careful, Tao, in this, to observe black's counterplay. Well, black played a5 now, trying to safeguard his queen side. White played rook takes f4, and now knight e6. Again, Lisitsyn is doing his best. He's playing his defensive role well, trying to exchange off pieces. But after rook g4 check, king f8, king takes c6 is actually payoff time. All those king moves earlier are about to bear fruit, because that's the pawn back that white lost. There's no useful discovered check from the black knight, and therefore white is probably actually winning this position, simply because he's playing with an extra piece. White's playing with rook, knight and king, whereas black is only defending with rook and knight. The king makes all the difference. Lisitsyn tried to bail out into a rook and pawn ending, with knight takes c5, king takes c5, rook e6, but now king takes d5. And I think we can safely assess this position as winning for white. He's a pawn up, he's got the better king, and he's got a passed pawn looming on the b file. We'll talk a little bit more about passed pawns later on. It's very difficult at this stage for black to mount any resistance whatsoever. And the important thing is that you should note the passive black king. Let's see how the game finished. Black managed to drag it out a little bit. Played rook b6, and now white got on with the business of creating a passed pawn, b4. A takes b4, a takes b4. The king came out. Again, white made a king move. Rook came across, and now a very accurate move by white. Rook d4, cutting the black king out of the action. All the action's taking place on the queen side. White has a rook and his king to support the passed pawn, to escort the pawn home. Black can only defend with a rook. So black, in dynamic terms, is in fact a piece down in this position. No wonder he can't do anything. He tried a check, not much cop. King comes in, another check, and the king goes to c7. Now all the ground has been done, all the ground has been prepared for the advance of the pawn. Right, well, rook f5, black can't do very much, he's got to try something. Another very accurate move by white, driving the king away. King goes to f6, and now the king has been pushed aside one more file. White's king goes to c6, and the advance of the pawn is not too far away. Black tries to create a last-ditch stand on f2, but white is having none of it, just safetying his pawn, and now a few last desperate moves led to a speedy resignation. Rook in behind the passed pawn, push on, and that is the end. An absolutely brilliant demonstration from Mikhail Tal